All right, welcome to Sunday School. As we near the end of the book of Genesis, we are now going to move Jacob and his whole clan down into Egypt, which builds to the end of this book, but it's really the transition that leads into the story of the Exodus. So it's really, on the one hand, if you're only reading the book of Genesis and that's all you have, this seems really exciting, like good news, like, hey, we're going on a trip to Egypt. But if you know the broader story, you see that this is about to go into a very negative period in the history of the Hebrew people. So let's go to chapter 46. All right. Can everyone see? We good? All right. When Israel set out on his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's own hand shall close your eyes. Now, again, we've talked about this in different contexts. Our omnipresent view of God, this seems like just a boring truism and like, let's get on with the story. But again, in an ancient Near Eastern world, for the deity to say, I am going with you is powerful. All right. And again, and I don't want to like dig into this too much, but again, we bring our mindset as we read. It doesn't sound like omnipresence as much as I'll take the trip with you. It isn't like I'm always hanging out in Egypt, but because you're going down to Egypt, I will go with you. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and the goods they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and they came into Egypt. And Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. And then it goes into a section where we won't read it, but just so we can see it. Now, these are the names of the Israelites, Jacob and his offspring who came to Egypt. Now, again, we've just heard about the birth of his sons, and some of the things that have happened with them. But if you look, it starts out with Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and then it shares the children of his children, all the way down through verse 27. And it says, the children of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. We already heard about that. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. All right, so they went from a clan of 12 sons and a daughter, and it has turned into 70. So again, this is going to be really interesting because they come in with 70, but they're going to leave Egypt with a whole lot more. But in the context of Genesis, it sounds like, oh, that's great. They were fruitful and multiplied like they were supposed to do. But then when they go to Egypt, they're going to really be fruitful and multiply to the point it starts to freak out the Pharaoh. All right, on with the story. So Israel sent Judah ahead to Joseph to lead the way before him into Goshen. When they came to the land of Goshen, Joseph made ready his chariot and went to meet his father Israel in Goshen. He presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, I can die now, having seen for myself that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you, you say, and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our ancestors, in order that you may settle in the land of Goshen, because all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians. Let me just comment on this a little bit. When you look at Egyptian materials, you have Egyptian shepherds, and people puzzle about this a little bit because there's nothing that directly says that Egyptians hate the shepherds. Now, there is in the ancient world always this feeling of the urban people are always a bit wary of the people who live on the margins, the semi-nomadic folk, herders, and the like. But I don't know that that's more Egyptian than any other civilized place. But this area, the land of Goshen, this is the eastern part of the Nile Delta. It is very flat. It is very fertile. It's very green. It's where all herders and livestock were kept. We'll see later, like even the king's livestock is up there. So that's just the area of livestock. And so what it seems Joseph is doing is he's keeping his relatives on the boundaries and in an area that would suit them economically, but without them getting all caught up into urban life and what that might mean for Egyptians. Anyway, that's what most people think is why he keeps going on with this say your herders, and it puts them in an area that is very beneficial to them and out of the main urban areas and really desert-like areas of Egypt. All right, any questions? Pretty straightforward section, but anybody have any comments, thoughts, or questions?
Yeah, I don't remember Joseph having a woman. So who is the mother of his sons that he had?
Yeah, he ends up with Asenath, who is the daughter of the priest of On. So when he gets his new name, and Pharaoh elevates him, he gives him a wife. So she bears, Ephraim and Manasseh, actually in opposite order. Manasseh.
So his wife is Egyptian.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, so it's like not only does he get this role, it's like he marries into, the upper echelon of Egyptian life. So he is clearly a person of standing. Anybody else? All right, let's look at 48. This is an interesting story. And again, it's more fun of a story because we've read through Genesis and we've seen what's happened generationally. All right. So Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. From among his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our ancestors were. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to reside as aliens in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flock, because the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now we ask you, let your servants settle in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brother have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know that there are capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So you see this like elevating them, even as foreigners. They're getting these elevated positions. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the years of your life? Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my earthly sojourn are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life. They do not compare with the years of the life of my ancestors during their long sojourn. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Jacob settled his father and his brothers and granted them a holding in the land of Egypt, in the best parts of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had instructed. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. Now, personally, I always wished in this spot, Jacob would have said to Pharaoh, "Hey, meet my sister." But that narrative from earlier does not continue with the wives and the sisters. Now, this next section is very interesting, and I want to read you something afterwards as I was kind of looking around at different commentators in their perspective on this. We're going to get a little picture of Egyptian society here, like what the effects of all this was on the Egyptians. And again, typically in the Bible, we're not worried about what's happening for the foreign peoples. We're only hearing about how that affects Israelites and Judahites and the family of Abraham. But here we get a little peek into the Egyptian world. Now, there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. The land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan was spent, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for their horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. That year, he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We cannot hide from the Lord that our money is all spent, that the herds of cattle are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. Shall we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We with our land will become slaves to Pharaoh. Just give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe upon them, and the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made slaves of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh, here is seed for you, sow the land. And at the harvests, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves and your household, and as food for your little ones." They said, "You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be slaves to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. Okay, now this is a really fascinating passage, because in the construct of the book of Genesis, this is a picture of, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." And as Pharaoh has elevated Joseph to be so high in the land, in that blessing, Pharaoh has gained not just all the money of the land, not just all the livestock of the land, but all the land, and the people are paying him 20% of the take. And so we see this picture, which again, in its context, there's part of it is like, well, there you go, it worked itself out. the promise has been fulfilled. The whole world, everyone that blesses this line of Abraham, they will be blessed. But this idea of all the people becoming slaves of Pharaoh, we are going to soon shift into the story of Exodus, where that has kind of a negative impact on the Israelites, who now have to find a way to get out of bondage. I was reading about this and trying to see what actual Egyptian documents, or are there Egyptian things that allude to this, and there's not. But I found a Jewish professor and theologian, and I just want to read you a little bit of what he wrote, because he talked about this passage, but instead of reading it as like a win for the Jewish people, he reads it as a cautionary tale. And again, this isn't the way we usually read this passage, but it's interesting, that rabbinic idea of like the scriptures are like a diamond, right? With 70 faces, turn it, turn it, turn it again. I want to just read to you how he sees this passage as a warning. All right. So he calls it how the Exodus really started. And he kind of walks through this passage. He talks about this radical shift in the political landscape of Egypt. I'm going to start right at this section. He says, while we don't normally teach this at our Seders, right? Because the Seder is them talking through the whole story of the Exodus and how it came about. And it begins with the book of Exodus, where it tells how Joseph's family had come down and a new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. So he says, we usually don't tell the story this way, but he says, Jewish complicity in the establishment of an ultra-powerful Pharaoh political regime set the stage for Jewish enslavement later on. Unchecked political power has a way of doing that, regardless of the circumstances, understandable or not, of how that power arises. This lesson from history was one that the American founding fathers got really right. And they built a system of government accordingly, which, despite the hiccup of the last few decades, has functioned fairly well to keep any part of the political system from attaining too much power on its own. In an age when Jews arguably, again, now this is a Jewish writer writing to Jews, in an age when Jews arguably hold more power than at any time in history, in terms of wealth, social status, political power, cultural power, and the list goes on, this reading of the text opens up a number of questions about today's community and where we find ourselves in an age of expanding income inequality. Are we American Jews complicit in the creation of expanding income inequality? Or are we trying to stop the emergence of an American plutocracy? Are we part of runaway market capitalism, or are we fighting for a better deal for working people? Are we Moses fighting for enslaved people's liberation from tyranny, or are we Joseph, the sycophantic political aide, helping a weak political leader weather a crisis and emerge more powerful than he could have imagined? While it's easy to tell just the story of our liberation from Egypt at our Seders, I'm going to make sure my children hear the story with Joseph's helping of the good Pharaoh, in the hope of adding a warning about what happens when we become too cozy with power. In today's American Jewish community, it may be that Joseph's side of the story is what we need to hear. Okay, I only read you that because in reading it, it is something I've personally never heard anyone make a commentary on that passage with that turn, which asks interesting questions about modern society. But let me, just before we move on, because I found it a bit shocking but intriguing at the same time, thoughts on a very different, like I don't know that I've ever heard that passage preached and someone do that with it. But it's very Hebrew Union College. Like it brought me back to graduate school. Like, nice. Any thoughts?
The Missouri Synod minister that I had studied the book of Genesis with previously brought that out.
Did they? Okay.
From the very beginning, the idea of taking everything away from the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Is it smart politics?
Right. And it's interesting. So let me just give one other time I heard something like this. In a student sermon at Hebrew Union College. And it was a student who was second generation Russian descent. And we all know, the very mixed history of, I can't even say mixed, about the Soviet Union treatment towards Jews and the attempt of Jews to get out of the Soviet Union to immigrate to Israel and America and things like that. Well, he starts his sermon talking about that, and everyone's nodding along. And then he starts to show how many of the earliest Marxists were actually Jewish, and that those who, were at the side of Stalin and Lenin were part of the Jewish community. And he kind of did this is heavily our own fault. Like, we did this to ourselves, which most sermons in I don't know if any seminary, but HUC that students give, it's like, all right, they got that out of the way and they can check the box. They've done a sermon in their junior year and their senior year, but they usually don't generate all that much conversation. But this one had like the whole campus hopping mad as everyone took sides, because it was this kind of like, hey, we should bear some of the blame for this. And I feel like this statement right here is kind of poking at American modern Judaism, saying, to what degree are we finding ourselves in a position? Whose side are we going to take, Moses or Joseph? Does that feel too strong, or do you feel that's an appropriate for all people of faith who have means in our society?
Well, I think it's appropriate for all of us to try to think through the consequences. And that's what this is offered as kind of a cautionary tale. But of course, no one can see 400 years down the road. And so if, I guess Joseph could have just given them the food without taking all of their stuff.
Yeah.
But then he probably would have been in bad shape himself. So,
right.
There's no way to tell. There's no way to tell where he was, what was going to happen 400 years later. So it's a cautionary tale, but I'm not sure that we can take any solace in the fact that we might be able to figure out what's going to happen, because we can't.
Yeah.
It's all a crapshoot.
Yeah, the beauty of history is probably no one of the slaves of Egypt 400 years later going, dang, Joseph, he made this happen.
So were the Egyptians
the
this whole slave thing that left? Those Egyptians that became slaves, were they slaves too? And did they leave with Moses?
No, but it's assuming like that it establishes this kind of system in which Egypt owns everything and enslaves its people. Yeah. So that's not a direct correlation to that part. All right. Any other thoughts? I just thought that was interesting, and I saw it and I thought, mix it up.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. We could have a whole class about just the issues of theology and systems. But it's the quickest thing is just what seems like a good idea at the time. Maybe not so much.
Yeah.
And how do we try to in the moment think as far ahead? Obviously, like Natalie said, we can't fully know. Foresight is iffy, but
someone with different expertise than me could teach the Bible and economic systems class. Mm-hmm. I'm just not that guy.
Yeah. The thing that hit me was that here is Joseph, who already knows the famine's going to last 7 years. So he's got this plan of, well, first I'm going to take your money, and then I'm going to take your livestock. And it's like, Jesus.
But again, in the context of the Genesis story and its themes, this is a perfect example of I will bless those who bless you, right? Like Pharaoh comes out with everything because that's what happens when you elevate one of God's family. You're gonna just, as much as you elevate or as much as you bless them, you're gonna get blessing in return. So it's like
At the expense of everybody else.
that's right. Pharaoh got the jackpot.
Yeah.
All right, let's
But
I never connected both of these stories, though. It's kind of interesting to think that they're both on different sides.
yeah.
that's true, but we're reading a story through the eyes of Joseph and the Israelites. And so to a great extent, we're rejoicing when little by little they acquire everything.
Yeah.
But it's usually human nature that they acquired it at someone else's misfortune. So it's human nature when that other group who has been taken advantage of because of their circumstances finally gets their chance, they erupt in ways that are unforeseen. And the more they were cheated or swindled or taken advantage of, let's say, even if they weren't legally cheated, the angrier they are once they get their chance, and that comeuppance is really enjoyed.
Yeah.
So I'm glad this rabbi talked about America, because that's sort of our situation now. So who are those people that think they've been cheated? There are more than one.
Yeah.
There are a lot. And they
Right.
feel that, okay, now we need to get our time in the sun. So it's never easy.
No. The fun of reading texts.
It is.
All right, let us go back to the screen.
I do.
He did it.
All right,
How many people?
verse 27.
Mhm.
Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. When the time of Israel's death drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor with you, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal loyally and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my ancestors, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He answered, "I will do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself on the head of his bed. Again, we talked about this earlier. All the patriarchs are buried in Hebron, at the field that Abraham bought in the cave. And again, tradition says that is now the mosque in Hebron, the mosque of the patriarchs. And this idea of putting your hand under the thigh, we've seen it before in here. It's part of a sign of in making an oath, and people have surmised why. Some have argued because of the placement of the hand under the thigh. It's close to male genitalia, which says something about swearing on the ancestors. That's not proven anywhere, but you'll read that different places as an assumption of why under the thigh. All right, let's look at one more section here, which again, this is again, knowing our story, knowing what's happened. This great ending of one of Jacob's final deeds. After this, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," he summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan." Remember, that becomes Bethel. "And he blessed me, and he said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make of you a company of peoples and will give this land to your offspring after you for a perpetual holding. Therefore, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are now mine, right? He's saying you're part of my ancestral line. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. Now, this is really interesting because Ephraim and Manasseh are going to get territory. The division of the land according to tribes is one in which these grandchildren, not sons, get divisions of land rather than some of the sons. And we'll talk about that later. But so he's saying, it's almost like he's elevating them onto the level of his own children. As for the offspring born to you after them, they shall be yours. So he's saying these ones become part of my line. They're part of like my son's generation. And he says the rest of your children will be your sons. They shall be recorded under the names of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. For when I came from Padan, Rachel, alas, died in the land of Canaan on the way, while there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, and he could not see so well. Okay, think about this. We're going back a generation, right? So just as Isaac could not see well when he had to bless Esau and Jacob, which Jacob took advantage of, now Jacob himself cannot see well as he's looking to bless his 2 grandsons, who is ultimately elevating to the place of sons. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I did not expect to see your face, and here God has let me see your children also." Then Joseph removed them from his father's knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right, and brought them near him. Now notice what he does, right? He puts them accordingly to age, so that his older son is on his right, on his left, younger son on his right, so that his father who's facing him, his right hand is toward the older, his left hand toward the younger, because the hand of blessing, the right hand, should go on the firstborn. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph also and said, "The God before whom my ancestors Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the boys. And in them let my name be perpetuated, and the name of my ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude on the earth." When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. He wants to redo it, right? This is what happened earlier. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he shall also be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them, saying, "By you, Israel, will invoke blessing, saying, God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh." So he put Ephraim's Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your ancestors. I now give to you one portion more than to your brothers, the portion that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. So we have here this, it is like continuing on in Joseph's family, what happened in Jacob's family, what happened with Isaac and in Abraham, where continually we keep blessing those people to put the younger before the elder. And Jacob did it through trickery. And then Joseph tries to line it up for his not well-seeing father, who you're thinking, okay, the guy's confused, he's older, he can't see well, let me line these up just right. But Jacob, being Jacob, knows exactly what he's doing, and he crosses up his hands to bless the younger. And this pattern, again, not just part of Genesis, we will see this throughout the Hebrew Bible, that God is the God of the younger, he's the God of the underdog, he's the God of the outsider. And if anybody knew that, Jacob knew it. And he wasn't going to let Joseph reorder the pattern for him. Any thoughts on this passage or questions?
So Jacob's trying to, or Joseph's trying to make it right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he knew he was wrong. Oh, amazing.
That's right. Joseph wants to keep order, and this is the way it's supposed to go. But again, it's really funny because it's like Joseph was the blessed favored one, and he's the baby.
Mm-hmm.
But in the next generation, no, you got to do it by the book.
Yeah.
It hasn't been by the book the whole story. But Joseph, right? Like each generation, though, that person thinks this is the way we should do things.
Very different.
Which is just,
Yeah.
So
You think Joseph of all people would know better,
I know.
but he's on top now.
That's right. No, I mean, there's something to be said there, right?
Mhm.
Understand the plight of the underdog until we're on top. And then sometimes we kind of forget.
Then it's pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right. He did it all himself. The younger, right? The younger would serve the older, or the older would serve the younger. Remember, we talked about the first time that's stated. It's ambiguous, but we see the way it plays out in the story. But even Joseph, who is the greatest beneficiary of that upside down reality, when it comes to his own children, says, no, we got to make sure we line this up just right. And if anything fits for the conclusion of the story, there's one more little passage where he's going to have his deathbed blessings. But if there's one last narrative that fits the trickster, is that he knows to go one last time, he turns the order on its head. So good for Jacob. On that level, he's consistent. You can call him Israel if you want, but he's still Jacob. Anything else?
So he got an extra portion of land when they go back. So I guess those would be then each of Joseph's sons would get a whole portion,
Yes.
just like every single one of the brothers.
Correct.
So in a sense, they would be elevated above them because their cousins would have to split their parents' portion.
Exactly right. And Joseph, the interesting part about it is that Joseph does not get a portion. Joseph, one could argue, sort of gets two portions because his two sons get a lot. But there is no tribe of Joseph in the land of Israel. There's the tribe of Manasseh and there's the tribe of Ephraim. So that's what part of what it's getting at. Like you get a double portion, you get two lots, but neither of them are named after Joseph. They're after his children. Which is it? I mean, so this is one of those places where historians ask all kinds of questions about the tribes, about matching up the tribes of Israel with the names of Israel's sons, because it doesn't all line up nicely. And some of this is going to get explained in a way on Jacob's deathbed blessing, because some of the family does not have portions of land. Right? Anything else on this? All right, let's look at, I don't know if we'll get through chapter 49, but we'll start it. So this chapter 49 is part of this is like really a certain type or genre of text that you have in the ancient world of deathbed speeches or deathbed blessings. And there's been some literature kind of talking these through and how they fit and how they function. But what we have here is Jacob giving a blessing to each of his sons. And it's interesting because it does a couple of things. It tries to say something about the nature of that son, but in it, it's seen as predictive of what the outcome of that son and their people group turn out to be like. So it's like any eponymous story where it's like, if you think of Native American stories, you have the story that explains why a reality is the way it is now. And the same way we've been seeing that throughout Genesis, where it's almost like political commentary, right? So Esau becomes the father of the Edomites with a kind of implicit, and just the way he was is the way those people were. And so we get some of that kind of a mindset in the father's last words to each of his sons. In some, there's just a passing line. Others, it goes into a little bit more deeply. And we hear echoes of things we've seen in the story, sometimes directly calling some things out. So let me go through a few of these. He says, "Assemble and hear, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father." Again, look at that's great. This is poetry. And notice the parallelism. Assemble and hear. The parallel line, listen. Sons of Jacob, Israel, your father, right? It uses both of his names. That's just good Hebrew poetry. Starts with firstborn. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the firstfruits of my vigor, excelling in rank and excelling in power. Unstable as water, you shall no longer excel, because you went up onto your father's bed. Then you defiled it. You went up onto my couch. All right. We already talked about this. He, in an act that in the ancient world would be seen as usurping, when he slept with his father's concubine. So in the end, the father calls him out for this and calls him, says, you've excelled all along, but excel no longer, and you are unstable. And if you think of the history of Israel and of its tribes, Reuben is not one that ever really rises to much importance in the story. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. May I never come into their counsel. May I not be joined to their company. For in anger they killed men, and at their whim they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now you do not have tribal lands for Simeon and Levi. The Levites, it's later explained, well, they're the priests, and the Levites need to be in all of the tribes. But this violence that it refers to is the story of the attack on the Shechemites after the rape of Dinah. Simeon and Levi, if you go back, they were the ones who were angry and conceived the plot. So here it's like, see, this is your payment. All right, we got time for one more. Judah, Your brothers shall praise you. Now think about this, like Judah's not a firstborn. We're going down in order here. But we've just explained to the side the first three. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches down. He stretches out like a lion, like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him up? Right? This image that will continue, the Lion of Judah. Judah is perceived as a lion from this passage. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and the obedience of the people is his. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Judah is portrayed as a strong man, as a warrior. And the warrior is the image of the king. Kingship comes out of Judah. We will see that throughout the story. The Bible is a Judahite book. David and all who follow are Judahite. And so, again, some can look at the Jacob's line and go, why is it that it's not his firstborn? Why don't we talk about the Reubenites? Well, this deathbed blessings sets up Judah as the one who shall be the most significant. All right, I know we have to stop here. Next week, we will spend the first half of time finishing out Genesis and pulling it all together. The second half, it's going to be like horse trading on the floor of the Congress to figure out what we're going to do next. So bring your best arguments, thoughts, filibusters, and we'll go from there. Let me pray for us. God, I thank you for this community we have. I thank you for your word. I thank you for time to be able to read and discuss and think about how not only you work in times past, but you continue to work in us today, and you call us as your people to do your work in the world and in society and in culture. God, be with us as we go into the church meeting. God, I pray that you give us ears to hear and hearts to understand, and that you let us be wise as we think about the future and how to make best decisions as a community. God, help us to continue to do your work. God, be with those who are sick in our community. Be with those who mourn. God, we thank you for the way you care for us and carry us forward. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, everyone. Great to see you, and I'll probably see a bunch of you in a little bit in the next Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.